Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome back to Procrastinator's Pit Stop. I am sitting with another amazing guest for you here today. We are sitting with Dr. Kate Lund. Dr. Kate is a podcast host, author, and psychologist who has been nice enough to grace us with her presence here and explain to us the different workings of our mind and on resilience and in specific in terms of parenting. Dr. Kate, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Chris, for having me. I'm really glad to be here.
We're happy to have you here. I mean, it's an interesting topic, and I'm sure we're going to dive right into it shortly. But before we do like to have an icebreaker on the show. And the question for you today is, which cartoon character do you resonate with the most, and why?
You know, I would say it's Mickey Mouse, bringing joy and kind of good feelings and happiness. And I have a lot of great memories. We took my boys to Disneyland for their birthday for many years in a row. And their first stop, particularly when they were very small, was Mickey's house. And so that is really something that elicits wonderful memories, and I really do feel aligned with kind of the ethos of Mickey and what he brings to the mix. So that's what I would say.
I like that. I like Mickey Mouse. But didn't he start out as Steamboat Willie, or am I wrong?
Yeah, yep, he did. Yep. And I remember in Mickey's house watching all of those old black and white movies as we're waiting in line to get our picture taken with Mickey. So yes, yes, he did. That was a big piece of the mix.
I like that. I really like that. So, Dr. Kate, how do you define procrastination, and what does it mean to you personally?
Well, procrastination is when we want to be doing something, and I have many examples of this, but we just feel stuck for some reason and we're not taking that step forward. We're not jumping into whatever it is we want to accomplish. And I think the reasons that that happens, at least the reason for me, kind of that I've identified, it's overwhelm. I'm the kind of person I've got a lot of different pies in the air, so to speak, or my finger in a lot of different pies at the same time. And, sometimes that can feel overwhelming. Sometimes that can stop the process, stop the progress. So that's kind of what it means to me. And I have areas where I certainly procrastinate, but I've learned over time the important lesson of asking for help and trying to delegate certain things. And it helps me break through my own procrastination.
And we all know that there's no real surefire 100%, cure all silver bullet to procrastination, but you just mentioned that in your case it mostly is it mostly delegation for that to get over that overwhelm for you?
It's delegation, but it's also taking a step back, trying to quiet my own mind to kind of quell the overwhelm, and then trying to prioritize. Okay, well, what are the most important moves here to get X, Y, or Z done? Or is it, on a given day that I want to edit a podcast episode? Or do I want to work on my book project? Or, is it something else that I should be doing? And I guess the thing that has helped me also over time is not trying to do everything at once. And that's unfortunately a trap that I have fallen into many times. And I still could fall into it, but it's really a question of taking that step back, quieting my mind, and gaining perspective on what's most important in the moment.
I like that. I don't think I've actually heard that particular take on it before. Prioritization, yes, but you actually go into the exact moment and see what is the appropriate task for this exact moment.
Yeah, this exact moment, because it's the moment where we get bogged down, right? Overwhelm will stop us in our tracks in the moment, and then that has ripple effects for how it goes moving forward. And it's easy to, when one is too overwhelmed, to just shut it all down and then progress is made on no front. So I find that is a really important strategy for breaking through the challenge of procrastination.
No, thank you for breaking that down. A little bit ago, we were discussing your different projects. I mean, you certainly do, as you mentioned before. You have many, pies in the air, or hands in or fingers in the pie. A lot of juggling. And you mentioned your podcast and how that sort of came about. And you said you had a story there you might like to share.
Yes, yeah, and there is procrastination involved there, although I'm not sure I was kind of naming it as procrastination at the time. But anyway, the idea of starting a podcast had been in my mind for a very long time. I love this kind of medium and this kind of way of getting messages out and such. I have a history in radio. I did a lot of radio when I was in college and early on in my career. And so anyway, I was always thinking, yeah, I'd really love to do a podcast, but I didn't really know how to put it together. I'm an idea person, and sometimes the technical aspects of things will bog me down and cause me to procrastinate. So I got a call at one point from this company called Mission Matters Podcast, and they have a podcast network, and they asked me to join. And I was still sort of hesitating. And I was talking about this at dinner one night. And my, at the time, 15-year-old son was like, Mom, come on, just hit record. Just stop thinking and start doing. And this came out of the mouth of a 15-year-old kid. I thought that was pretty funny. We all laughed. And then the next day, I'm like, you know what? He's right. I need to just do this. And that, I think, was the final push I needed to break through the hesitation, procrastination, whatever it might have been to get this project started. And I have to say, it was an amazing move. I love doing my podcast called The Optimized Mind. It's been amazing, an amazing experience connecting with so many guests. I'm sure you have the same experience. And we're 126 episodes in, so I'm yeah, glad I broke through that hurdle.
No, I love hearing that story, and it's so true that our children can. Well, what did they say? Out of the mouths of babes. Children have no filter, and yet sometimes they have this way of just cutting through the. I guess the smoke and the cutting through the excuses that we make for ourselves and sort of point that out to us.
Yes, exactly, exactly. And the excuse is right. And for me, it was the tech. I was kind of getting overwhelmed by, well, how would that work? And how does it all come together? And so that's why I was so fortunate when Mission Matters called, because I record, I set up my interviews, I record, and then I send it off, and they help me with the rest of the process. And so for me, that's a really good balance. It's a great strategy. So I get a little bit of help on that piece that felt particularly overwhelming.
I like that. I like that. You understand, and you've got this mission, and you've got this message you're getting out in the podcast, and they were able to help you with that, right? That goes back to delegation. And let me ask you, when you're delegating things, it's very difficult. Often there's a trust thing. Often there's the question of, oh well, can I do this better than this other person, or I can do it faster. In the cases where we may not necessarily be good at it, like when I delegate my marketing or anything like that, but in other cases, we are good at it, like when I wanted to delegate, maybe some translation work that I do between English and Spanish sometimes. And I have a hard time doing that sometimes because it's like, how do I trust that they're going to do this better than me? Right. So, how do you sort of get over that bump to trust and be confident that, you're delegating in the right way?
Incredibly difficult, right? That's a really great question. It's hard. And I have definitely not mastered that question in any way. I've been very lucky. Another area where I was procrastinating in a very real way was social media. And just recently, I've got a team on board that's helping me with social media for somewhat of a discrete period of time. At this point, I'm going to kind of see how it goes. But I had made several attempts previous to that to get some help from a different angle, and it didn't work out. It was a disaster. And those things happen, right? So sometimes the delegation piece, at least in my experience, has been about, or has to be about, trial and error. You do your best to find the best possible match for whatever it is you need help with, but it's not always going to work out. And you can be as discerning as possible, and maybe it's still not going to work out. So I've had those issues pop up as well. And there's still other areas where probably could be delegating, but I'm not, based on exactly what you said. not wanting to give up too much. For example, my email gets to be a mess a lot of the time. And wow, if I had someone helping me kind of go through it and target the most important things, but I don't want to do that because I feel like it would end up taking more time, that kind of thing. So I think being really discerning about where you should delegate and then understanding that kind of flexibility and thinking around, maybe you're going to have to try it from another angle and that's okay.
I'm glad that you brought up that and the social media and the email inbox and things, and I'm curious to your opinion on this as well. I guess it goes back to the trust factor a little bit. There are so many AI tools now that we can program exactly the way we want. We can get them in our inbox. We can get them to post our posts. We can get them to write for us. I don't use any of them, but they're really popular. Do you think it's easier to delegate to something like that, like a system like that, than to a person?
I'm not sure, to be honest. I mean, possibly, but I don't know because I don't have a lot of experience using those tools either. I am using one tool to help me with a small aspect of my podcast, say writing show notes and such, but I always edit them afterwards. But it gives me a framework to start from. But I would never actually, as I'm talking about this out loud, delegate to AI exclusively because I feel like it's always going to be important to have that personal, that human touch, intermixed with whatever AI is going to create. But I will say that for me personally, getting a little bit of help with transcripting and show notes and that sort of thing through AI has been pretty helpful. So I guess I've delegated a slice of it to one particular program, but I'm still working all that out and trying to learn how all that works. But we'll see how it evolves.
And just to swing back to the children aspect and parenting, and I got to admit, I'm a little bit selfish in this aspect because I'm a parent. I know there's a lot of parents out there who might listen and tune in too. You're actually writing a book that's called "Step Away: The Keys to Resilient Parenting."
Yes.
Now, I'm going to go into a question here just right off the bat. All of my audience is rolling their eyes in the back of their head. I'm going to get the backlash and the messages in a second, I'm sure. They say that writing a book is 98% procrastination and 2% actually doing it. In your case, how true is that?
Oh, that's a great question, right? And so there's definitely, I think, for me, at the outset, some procrastination on the book writing front. It's another area where I had an idea for a very long time, and this book took quite a bit of time to evolve and really came to fruition again when I was able to delegate, team up with, learn a bit more about the process, delegate some of the writing, which then came back to me to be revised and tweaked and such. But I think for me, writing a book, at least in my own experience, and I've written books in the past as well, works best when it's a collaborative experience. And that's certainly been the case here with this book as it's coming to fruition. I mean, obviously, you know, I'm the point person because I'm the author. So everything, comes back and I never don't look at, what we've got going in the current draft, so to speak. But the collaboration on a project that big, I think is really important.
Collaboration is definitely important.
And it holds you accountable and it makes true procrastination, like just not doing it or getting completely stuck, much more difficult to happen because you've got calls set up to review certain aspects. You've got, dates, you've got goals, you've got dates that have to be met. So I think the collaborative piece, at least for me, helps the process move forward.
No, you're talking about accountability, and your collaborators are almost like accountability partners in that sense. This is actually a question I've had in the back of my head too, and I wonder what your take is on it. Why is it, do you think, that we can be accountable to others so much easier than we can just be accountable to ourselves?
Yeah, that is such a great question, right? And, I think it's it really comes back down to, mm, you know, not really meeting the expectations of others in terms of accountability, but it's easier to make excuses, move in different directions when it's just us. Like, for example, having a goal to go to the gym and then you're tired and you don't go and you just have to answer to yourself. It's difficult on a certain level. But if you're meeting a trainer at the gym and you're tired and you don't go, you're going to either have to pay for that session or get an angry, frustrated call from the trainer that you've stood up at the gym. And that layer on top of not going in and of itself, if it's just you who's supposed to be going to the gym, is it feels worse, right? So there's an extra layer involved when there's accountability related to another person. And so that's kind of the way I see it. Um
No, that makes a lot of sense, but it also segues into something that I think is probably one of the biggest forms of procrastination out there. And that, as it relates to self-care and, especially when it comes to like, when it comes to parenting, because there's a lot of guilt around it, or there's, I'm doing this for my children, I don't do it for myself. Your book actually goes into a lot about that.
yes, yes it does. The book is really a parenting manual outlining sort of a structure, a framework for how we as parents can take care of ourselves, and then how that helps us as parents to build resilience, and how that then informs our parenting in a very positive way by setting a model, a framework for our kids to absorb, throughout their childhood, such that we're helping them, in essence, become more resilient along the way.
No,
And
I
so
like.
yeah, it's really, and it outlines this idea of really, stepping away in a sense that we're caring for ourselves, building our resilience, and then that's going to help our parenting, make our kids stronger along the way. Counterintuitive when some folks hear it up front, but really a lot of power in the model, I believe. It's a lot of what I teach my clients along the way. It's what we work on day to day.
Could you maybe give a small example of kind of maybe one instance what that kind of looks like in terms of if I build resilience and I handle things well, then I the trickle down effect is that my son daughter will pick up on that.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. So it all starts with quieting our mind, right? Taking time to modulate our central nervous system. Because if we're, always starting up here in terms of our baseline level of stress, and then a challenge hits, we're really going to escalate, possibly to the point of shutdown, right? And we're going to probably respond to that challenge in a way that we're not proud of, that doesn't make us happy. We might, snap, we might demonstrate anger, we might, shut down, as I mentioned, all of these things. But if we're taking the time each day as parents, and there's really no one size fits all in how to do this, but to modulate our central nervous system, to quiet our minds, to make it so that our baseline is here, so that we can then kind of ride the challenges that arise through the day, because challenge is going to come up, right? In one way or another, we're all going to face numerous challenges throughout the day. So if we're able to do that, we're going to be able to, as I mentioned, ride the wave of challenge. We're not going to react. We're not going to be reactive. We're not going to, we'll respond in a way that we can be proud of. And so if we think about it, if our kids are seeing us respond to challenge in a way that's not so helpful, that's not so helpful to us, not so helpful to working through and beyond the challenge, it's not going to be so helpful for them. It's not going to set the kind of example that we might want to set. But if we're able to contend with challenge more like riding that wave in a way that makes sense, we do feel good about, we can be proud of when we step back. and look at it from a distance. And we're setting a different example for our kids. We're modeling for them how to be proactive as opposed to reactive in the face of challenge. So that's one sort of example that I can can come up with.
I like that. I like how you say, proactive versus reactive because, and I'm guilty of this too some days, we roll out of bed to an alarm, right? And cortisol levels spike. And then we, stub our toes. We stumble out of bed because maybe we hit the snooze button too many times. And then, the son or daughter is out there and they, they tip over their milk and then it's on top of your and realistically, tipping over the milk is not a big deal. You have to clean it up, but it's because it's that extra
Right.
spike, like you said, right? That it sort of
Yeah.
puts it all over the edge.
Yeah, absolutely. Right. And it's those small things that then can become really big things, right? And the other piece of this, so quieting your mind, super important. Also caring for ourselves such that we're, physically and emotionally beyond quieting our minds in as solid a place as possible. And that is incredibly easier said than done, right? Because we're all, particularly as parents, moving through the world at warp speed. There are demands coming at us from all directions. And it can be really, really difficult to, eat well in a way that works for our body, be getting consistent exercise, to be connecting with friends, getting that social support, all of these things. It's really so much easier said than done, but so, so vital. And I've learned that along the way. My boys are 17, and I came into parenthood 17 years ago thinking, how hard could this be to strike a balance? I'm going to have these kids. It's amazing. It's going to be great. Yeah, it took me very little time. My husband was on the road 6 days a week in those days, and so I was basically alone with the twins. And we moved a couple times as a result of my husband's job. And yeah, it didn't take me long to realize that that balance was incredibly elusive, and I was going to need to put a definitive focus. And it took years to strike that kind of a balance that would make things, solid. But it's not an easy process, but that idea of taking care of ourselves physically, emotionally, getting the pieces of social support in place, and all these really, really vital to help us maintain our sense of semblance of balance as parents.
Not, and I really like the way that you phrased that. I find this really weird dichotomy in our society, though, right? We talk about self care being so important. And yet we seem to live in a society that sort of accentuates and glorifies, being the workaholic. You need to burn yourself out, or if you take 5 minutes or an hour to go golfing, maybe golf is a bad example. Maybe you take an hour to meditate in the morning or whatever. And you don't have meetings before 10 or whatever like that, right? And yet that you're called selfish, you're called a narcissist, another nice little buzzword everyone likes to throw around, right? How do you kind of try and get over that thought that it's selfish, or if it's uh oof, I hate that word, narcissistic.
Yeah, I don't like that word either, so I'm with you on that. But yeah, that's a really good point because it is true, right? And sort of there is that societal expectation on some level to, be moving through life at warp speed and all these things. But bottom line is that's just not good for us and it's not good for those around us. And so that's actually one of the main messages in my book, Step Away: The Keys to Resilient Parenting, because in order to function at our best, in order to help our kids to function at their best, we need to not do that. We need to not be moving through life at warp speed, and we need to create, a structure which helps us to flourish within our own unique context. And again, there's no one size fits all really in this. We have some pillars along the way, but really it's putting the pieces into place in a way that works for you as an individual that's going to be so important. And, maybe there's some people out there who are wired to flourish when they're moving at warp speed. I think that if they were to slow down and take a look at it, they would find that there are other ways to go that would allow them to flourish even more. But I'll tell you for a fact, I am not wired that way. So I really had to, particularly in the early days of parenting, take a step back and figure out, okay, what's the best strategy? What's the best approach for you, Kate, in creating some sort of a foundational balance here. And again, flexibility in thinking, because there are going to be challenges, ebbing and flowing, what have you. But yeah, it's finding out what works best for you. And in most cases, that's not moving through life at warp speed.
But it is what we're all used to, but there is that, if you go through life happy, then, people will be happier around you and things will be easier. They started with happy wife, happy life, then they changed to, happy spouse, happy house to be more inclusive. Happy kid, don't flip your lid. I don't know, something like that, right? Although I don't really see a good spot for happy kid, don't flip a lid, because that sort of leans towards people pleasing. Yeah, yeah, that's an ugly word with children, isn't it? Because we want to give them everything, and yet, really, if we do that, we're teaching them people pleasing.
Right. Yeah, that's such a good point. And that's a really important area to strike a balance, right? It's, of course, I mean, yes, innately as parents, I think we do. We want to give our kids everything, but that's ultimately not going to be helpful to them long term, right? We need to, in kind of developmentally appropriate ways along the path of childhood and parenting, give them sort of the message of the importance of personal responsibility and being held accountable for their actions, and that they can't have every toy that they want right now, but maybe there's a way that they can save up the money from allowances or little jobs around the house or what have you, such that they can then have agency to buy that toy for themselves or something along those lines. And then, there's a lot of power, a lot of benefit for our kids in, grappling with challenges on their own, as long as those challenges, there's a line, a fine line that we don't want to cross. Of course, there are moments when we need to intervene as parents, but there are also smaller kinds of challenges, different kinds of challenges that we can let our kids sort of grapple with on their own, holding them accountable for getting their work done, doing their homework, making sure their chores happen, and ultimately that message that no, they can't have everything they want in this moment. So yeah, that's a balance that we have to strike as parents, but it's a really important one.
You know, you hit on a couple of things there that I'm curious about. Your view, since you're writing this book and on self care and things. But what do you feel when we are talking to children, and do we? I mean, I've sort of broached this a little bit with my 12-year-old daughter. Based around what we were discussing just now, like the wants, and you can't have everything you want exactly when you want it.
Mhm.
Tried to sort of broach it. Well, why do you want it? What's the purpose of you having it? Do you think it's useful to do those sorts of things with children, starting, when they're, sort of showing signs that they're capable of that?
Yeah, yeah, right. In that developmentally sort of appropriate space, which happens at different points for different kids, right? So there's no one size fits all there either, but absolutely, because it helps kids to, you know, hone in on a sense of their own self-awareness. Like, why do I really want that toy? Is it because my friend has it? Is it because, I have a passion for building this kind of model or for doing that kind of artwork, that kind of a thing? So is it a passion, something I'm really going to focus on long term? Or is it a fleeting sort of like, well, I want that because my friend has it. And then, 2 days later, I'm going to forget about it. Those are very different things, right? And if a child can highlight or zero in on the fact that this is something that they're really passionate about and they want to build on, you know, having this toy or art set or model kit or whatever, that's a really cool thing, right? But if it's just like for the sake of having it, just to have it, and then it's going to be meaningless, a short time later, that's a different thing too. So helping them to understand that, I think, is a real benefit.
It's kind of like almost like the self-care too, right? I mean, and this is where those guilt strings come in, right? Because especially with younger children, you'll be sitting there after a long day at work, and you're just like, well, you know what? I just want to unwind. I just want to sit and watch TV, and maybe have a cup of tea, or whatever it is I do. And I'm guilty of this too. I've grappled with the guilt 'cause it feels real as I'm sitting there. I want to watch my favorite show, but my daughter comes up to me. She's come home from school. I've just I've got off work. She hasn't seen me all day. She doesn't talk to me a lot. It's that frustration level that kicks in, right? Like, I just literally got in, right? But we have that guilt that we should immediately pay attention to the child, right?
Yeah, yeah, there's that guilt there, right? But it's that question of taking the time to do what you need to do for yourself so that you're setting yourself up for a meaningful interaction with your child. Because and I've experienced this many times in my life, particularly when my guys were really little and my husband was away 6 days a week, if I didn't take that, few moments to reset or even that half an hour on the treadmill, my interaction with them wouldn't be the same. It wouldn't be as positive as it could be, right? I would be exhausted. I would be maybe a little bit cranky, maybe, short in my responses. I wouldn't be in a space to truly engage, whether that was in play or in conversation or, and even now, my guys are, wanting to have really in-depth, meaningful conversations. And so I need to be in a great space for those too, right? So it changes over time, but the message is the same, to really set yourself up for positive moments, positive interactions by taking care of yourself first.
I I definitely agree with you 100% on that. The one big pushback that I'm sure you hear, I've heard it, I've given it, is that I'm much too busy to devote 30 minutes, an hour, 2 hours. How long? And again, everybody's different. But if we had to pick let's say a decent number, or a number that's going to be what we feel will be effective, how long do you really need to take on a self-care practice, or a moment to regulate?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I do get that pushback a lot. Like, I'm so busy, I've got no time for that. Like, that's crazy. But really, so much power in doing it. And so it looks different for everybody. It can be, and what works for everybody is different, right? You can really modulate your mind, kind of quiet it, kind of create a kind of well managed central nervous system in 2 to 5 minutes. You can literally grab a cup of tea, go into another room, focus on a word or a phrase that you find soothing, and just breathe as you're sipping on that tea. And so you can do that in very short spurts, right? But some folks might want to plug in that, half hour, 45 minutes on a treadmill in the morning, and that might keep them level for a large part of the day. But if you're coming home from work and you feel like you pressed for time, you don't have a lot of time, but you want to regulate before you start engaging with your kids, particularly if the need from the child is high, like if they're very small and they want you to play, an active game with them or what have you, you can really quiet your central nervous system, modulate yourself, give yourself that space that you need to come back in a much stronger place in 2 to 5 minutes.
Two to
I
5 minutes.
Yeah, 2 to 5 minutes. I mean, I recommend, creating a more robust sort of exercise and, all these things, but you can really quiet your central nervous system very quickly.
So maybe we can sort of steal from the fitness industry a little bit, because the mind is a muscle, I guess. But they say if you're too busy for exercise, you do exercise snacks, which are like 5-minute intervals whenever you remember, like every hour or 2 hours during the day or something like that. So something similar would work. Well, in theory, would work for someone looking to regulate themselves. Right?
Yeah, for someone looking to quiet their mind, absolutely. And I teach a technique that's derived from a technique, very robust technique developed by a physician in Boston in the 1970s, Herbert Benson. And he was a cardiologist and recognized how important it was for his patients to quiet their mind. His colleagues at the time thought that, what are you doing getting into this space? This is not medicine. But honestly, this thing has evolved and it's the cornerstone of the mind body medicine program at Mass General Hospital in Boston, become a very world renowned big deal. And so I teach folks a technique derived from his work. And you can do it in, yeah, as I mentioned, 2 to 5 minutes. You focus on that word or that phrase that you find soothing in some way and you breathe. And that is at the foundation of quieting your mind. I work with, my parents who I work with on this, use it with athletes. Kids can use it in school if they're worried or nervous about a test coming up. For us as parents, as folks out there in the workforce, difficult conversation coming up, we can just take a step back. We can do this, and it's very, very powerful, particularly if practiced consistently over time.
Consistency. There's a nasty word sometimes. Build a habit. Dr. Kate, it's been a really great conversation, a lot of great insights. I could probably go for another 3 hours on the subject because parenting is such an interesting topic and self care is so important, and a lot of us don't talk about it. But we are coming up pretty close to the time. Is there anything that I didn't ask that you wish I would have asked, or anything that we should have covered that we didn't cover today?
I think, Chris, that we covered it really well.
Well, thank you so much for being on the show again today, Dr. Kate. And just before we go, then, what's the best way for our listeners to maybe reach out, learn more about you? When's your book coming out? All the good juicy details.
Sure. So the book, Step Away, The Keys to Resilient Parenting, is coming out June 3rd. So really excited about that. And folks can find me on my website, which is www.katelundspeaks.com. And I'm very active on LinkedIn. And I'm also out there on Instagram as well.
Excellent. Thank you so much for that. And to all our listeners, don't worry. We are going to put that in the show notes so it's easy enough for you to see. And when the book is released, we'll even go back into the show notes and we're going to put a little link there to make the book easy for you to find. Once again, Dr. Kate, thank you so much for being on the show and sharing these wonderful insights. And to all our listeners, thank you for tuning in. And just remember, if you can't find that motivation or inspiration for yourself today, maybe just go out and try to be that motivation and inspiration for someone else. And we'll see you again next time.